I'll do my best. I really don't like lecterns because it makes me feel too formal, and this is an absolutely informal conversation. So first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you and share some thoughts, some experiences, and I have some requests and suggestions in that order, I hope. I'm an interloper. I'm not an IETF member. I have read RFCs. I've questioned RFCs, and I've implemented RFCs. But that's the limit of my IETF exposure. What I want to share with you is what I call a view from the field, a report from the field. I've been a security practitioner for quite some time. When I say security, I mean traditional cybersecurity. But before that, and there was a before that, I was deeply involved with several engineering disciplines. And as many of us, especially those of us over 40, we fell into networking. We didn't desire to go into networking. So for context setting for this conversation, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I started to read Mark Twain when I was forced to in Jesuit high school. So I always take liberty with some of his quotes. And over the years, the more I've been involved with the internet, truly, the more I love my dog. And my dog does have an IP address, by the way. He has a chip. And that chip is more than just tracking. It has all of her health records. It has her vaccination schedule. It has her likes and dislikes for food. And if I'm lucky, I can actually track her too. That's a byproduct. But it sets the tone for where we are today. IETF is 30 years old, and congratulations. Very few organizations of any type can last 30 years. 30 years ago, I had just completed my first major series of projects. So let me give you a little bit of background. My first job out of university was at Argonne National Laboratories. Now, I didn't know anything about nuclear physics. I didn't know anything about National Battery Testing Labs. I didn't know anything about much of anything except I could write good real-time code. And by real time, it meant it was not done in real time, but it was for systems that ran in real time. And basically today we call these embedded systems. So I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, Midwest boy, drive to Chicago, and I go to the labs, and big burly men with guns greet me. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? What am I getting into here? And as they escort me to my first building, there are these very short, very albino deer. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I know they have nuclear stuff here. And I'm thinking deer, and I'm seeing deer, and something's not correlating. And I'm thinking, what am I getting myself into? And then I meet the lab director, who was very gracious, and welcomed the newcomer, and said, I know you're thinking about the deer, aren't you? And in all honesty, yes, sir, it did cross my mind. He goes, don't worry, they're bred this way. They're from Switzerland, and it was part of the deal for the land grant for Argonne National Labs. And I'm sticking to it. So my first job was writing code for one of the reactors that Argonne had at the time. It's called the treat reactor. It's a thermal test reactor. And I wrote code for folks who were far, far smarter than I am. In fact, several were up for the Nobel years later. But it was like a Disneyland for nerds. You could do anything. Everything you wanted was there. There was, time was kind of an option, but delivery and accuracy was critical. So I wrote code for the treat reactor to manage the collimator, which moved back and forth, and the physicists can do their physics stuff or whatever, and They wanted to make sure that the data I gave them was correct, and it was all that kind of nonsense. So I did that. They were happy. My boss was happy, and nothing glowed. So that was success. And good times, right? So back in the day, people would play around in the middle of a nuclear reactor. How quaint, Yeah, I guess then they decided to put the signs up. So I cut my teeth on real-time systems. And part of that was making not only the analog digital analog conversions, all that stuff, which is easy, but making systems that weren't meant to talk to each other. That was my introduction to networking. Although we didn't call it networking then, we just called them control planes. Not to be confused with today's control plane. So about 25 years after I left this program, I ran across one of the departmental directors who had retired. I was invited to his retirement. He goes, hey, Kevin, they're still running the reactor with your code 25 years later. Now, this is in western Idaho. So if you ever go to western Idaho, don't. I would fly all around it to make sure that Kevin's 40-year-old code is still running there somewhere on the reactor. But what I did realize was that I liked the communications narrative. I liked that. It was fun. At university, I had to, instead of taking a spoken language, I took Fortran and APL. And it qualified for foreign language, which was hilarious. But I really enjoyed making things work that weren't meant to work together. So after Argonne, I ended up at a company who was subcontracted to do DDN, if you remember that, Defense Data Network, the MILNET separation. And then I really got to understand and know networking the hard way in a classified environment where time was a commitment, and the notion of security was now introduced to me as a very young engineer. So in 1986, the year IETF was founded, was an interesting year for a lot of things. We had Top Gun. That was awesome, cool. Microsoft went public, and so the notorious Willie G became on his way to being a billionaire. We had the Mac SE, if you remember that. But that was the first time that the Macintosh gained credibility in business. So it was a big thing for some of us who were Apple devotees back in the day. And we had the internet looking something like this. And as I said, I was working on had just come off of working on DDN. Yep, done. And then I had moved to this little university on the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. Some of you may have heard of it, Berkeley. Yeah, well, if you notice, all the universities to the right are all East Coast, and they threw in a little carrot to Berkeley. But I was working on BSD, and among other things, some of the BSD stack came my way, my team's way, including Bind, and I always thought that was a terrible, terrible name, because it really put us in a bind where we're in a period where we're making the transitions from proprietary networks to, of course, TCP/IP based. But it was a learning experience. But what I took from that, from my experiences prior, especially working on a DDN, was that we, practitioners, need to think about a future state where we don't know everyone who is going to be working with us, communicating with us, and associating with us. We won't know them. It wasn't that we were so prescient that we foresaw the collapse of 32-bit address space, not even close. But we were already going from 2,000 networks to 30,000 networks in a very short period, and they always weren't people that we knew. They always weren't associations that we knew. We needed a different model. So there were a group of us who kind of banded together, of course. I don't know if you've been to Berkeley, but one of the great artifacts of the university is some of the best food in the world. We call it Gourmet Ghetto. I think there's been at least 20 companies started either on the telegraph side or the other side of campus, but we would go and just collaborate and say, look, what can we do that's different? What can we do with the tools available? Or, oh, by the way, we know how to write code, so we can write new tools. What could we do? And we got shouted down. We got shouted down quite simply by the Moats and Castle folks, who simply said, put up big barriers and move on. We don't have time. So I share that with you because I look back now as a practitioner and wish that I had the temperament, the experience, and the voice for that team then to have stood up and say, no, we need to do this the right way now. Now, fast forward, I'll close out on a little bit about me, and that is the last 18 years I've been solely focused on cybersecurity, and including multiple CISO roles and a few startups, successful startups, frankly, too, which is a benefit, too. Excuse me. But what I want to share with you are some of the pitfalls, challenges that we all face. Those who are designing the internets, I said plural, intentionally, and those who are operating the internets. 1986 also was a time where things that weren't so pleasant happened. Chernobyl. By the way, Chernobyl wasn't the first runaway. We all know that, but it was one of the largest. In fact, for those who are interested, the first meltdown, uncontrolled meltdown, was actually at Argonne in '55. And of course, we had the Challenger. Now, keep these in mind as we go through this afternoon's discussion. These were extremely catastrophic events that were caused by oversight, undersight, just human error. Both could have been avoided. We know that in retrospect. But they could have been avoided locally. That's where I'm going to pause for that for now. So, after 18 years of running security teams, just prior to joining Juniper, which was 8 months ago, I was a CISO at Walmart.com, for those in Great Britain as ASDA, permanently attacked. I had the situation where customers, 200 million customers, came to me already compromised, but want to buy things. That's the real world. That's Amazon. That's us. I mean them, sorry. Freudian slip. That's companies who have to take financial instruments with a username and a password. And then, oh, by the way, I don't care how strong your password is, it doesn't matter when the keystroke logger has been on your computer for the last 2 years. I would get data dumps from the dark web purveyors, and it would start with 1,000 credentials a week, then 2,000, until it hit a crescendo of 250,000 unique credentials in a week of my customers. And oh, by the way, they had some great passwords in there. Extremely good. In fact, I use one of them now. They're so good. But they were compromised, so it doesn't matter. So how do you actually conduct commerce when your customer's coming to you and you have to determine whether she's real or not? Well, clearly you have to use other analytic tools to determine the buying behavior patterns, all that kind of good stuff. And oh, by the way, geolocation is not one of them. It's irrelevant. But whether or not you go directly to the electronics section and buy 5 iPads is a hint. Whether or not you change your shipping address is another hint. Whether you do the myriad of activities that the traditional thieves will do are the hints, not your user password and not your geolocation. So I'm just throwing it out there. It's just a little bit of a pet peeve of mine where people think, oh, stronger passwords, and I can give you all the strong passwords you want. It's irrelevant. So after practicing this wonderful, fun, and low-taxing occupation for 18 years, we figured, what can we do to change the internet? So I did what anyone with a modicum of intelligence would do, and that's I asked Siri. So I asked Siri, How to improve the internet for security. You can see some of her answers there. Wasn't really that helpful. So if you know Siri, you know that it's like Google search. You have to ask the question in the right way. So I tried again. And not much help. So I figured, what better place to go to ask these questions than IETF? So here I am. So a little bit of quick run on history. Many of us in the room have been there, but some of us have not or may have intentionally forgotten. In 1986, the year IETF was founded, there were 0 known internet attacks. 0. It's easy. It's a trick question why, but I think we all know. The internet wasn't really there yet. It was kind of there, but not quite there. And we all knew all 2,000 of the sites. But in '88, we had the first, and of course, that's the Morris worm. I was at Cal still, at a research team, and we got slammed with the Morris worm. It was more like the Morris slug, but our machines were slow, so worm was fast enough. But what that did was that raised the consciousness of, oh my God, we really have to do something, because I'm not in control of my assets. I was between the BSD team and the ACS, which is the Academic Computing Center team. So on the academic side, I had professors and true Nobel laureates screaming at me from Switzerland and from all parts of Europe saying, I can't get to my system, I'm giving a presentation or whatever. It's like, dude, chill. Before we said, dude, chill. I said, we don't know what's going on. That was a wake-up moment for me and my team, especially the folks who were writing a lot of the code that people were relying on. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't have the wherewithal and the tools at the time to determine it. So if you read the Cuckoo's Nest, Cliff Stoll and all that kind of stuff, anybody who would spend as much time as Cliff did going through his phone records probably needs a life. But we were trying to figure out what was going on in real time, and I'm going to tell you, this was an eye-opening experience, and one I don't want to repeat, because no one knew. And I underscore that. The NSF folks didn't know. We had contacts at IBM, they didn't know. Nobody really knew on the first day when it was started. But I bring this up because since then, of course, the attacks have gotten far more sophisticated, far more targeted, and far more effective. So 2016, don't even worry about counting. It's just insane. There are companies built on trying to calculate how much of the impact there is on the internet from attacks. It's silly. It's a specious set of descriptors from my perspective, because it doesn't matter. The real number that matters is how many are breaches of significance, and the best estimates are around about 1 a week of a significant breach. Now, and I say this with authority. I used to also be the CISO at Symantec, and I ran one of the first research groups we had on breach detections. So the consensus around those who do this daily is that it's about 1 a week. So it's 50 plus a year of successful breaches. So on the malware side, things are a little different. Because frankly, if you pay me to break in, and oh, by the way, I used to do that as well. We didn't use the term white hat hacking. I hated that term. But we were favorable hackers. And I almost always got in layer 7. In fact, we never not got in. There are a few times we got in through the plumbing by virtue of looking at change control, for example. And in fact, we could, through our reconnaissance, we can tell most companies, we actually had a log, now the bad guys in the darknet sell it, of when companies had their change control. JP Morgan Chase, for example, just throw that name out there, it's not necessarily them, Tuesday at 7 p.m. We knew it. So Tuesday about 10 p.m. is when we try our pens. Because guess what? Typically, through a change control window, mistakes are made. So that was just the ripe time for phishing, right? So we did that, and so layer 7. Now, having said that, when people made mistakes on changes and change controls, it usually was either a deprecated or an older release. For For example, a good one was always, first thing we did, everyone does, right? You go for SNMP and DNS. You just go right for that. It's easy. It's like the slow gazelle. And when they made a mistake, bam, we're in. They don't know it. We're sitting there. It was just very, very common. Fast forward, today it's a lot harder because so much is also being done in the cloud. And I'm going to talk about that later. But the cloud actually is a really great buffer from a security perspective. A very great buffer. Makes it a lot harder, not impossible. So in 1986, there were 6 confirmed, well-known viruses. Because what happened was the folks who were actually collecting the viruses, first of all, were doing sneakernet. That was the only way of really doing it. It was very difficult to transfer viruses other than physical media. And the virus writers were basically academics anyway. So it wasn't that, the landscape wasn't that bad. You had John McAfee and Peter Norton running around in their vans in San Jose, literally driving around their vans to pick up virus samples. So it was a much easier time. Well, today, there are well over 1 million a day. The asterisk is that these are almost all variants. When you talk to the trends of McAfee semantics and the like, they'll tell you, and so folks, they'll tell you that it's not a lot uniqueness there, but it's enough of a spin to still cause a problem. And this is today's threat level. We're always at orange. I don't know why they even bother. It's always there. But we had a time when it was easy to identify and prevent malware. AV is dead. It doesn't know it yet. It's dying under its own demise from having to maintain 20, 30 years of history. Because all I need as an attacker is to go back to an old problem, an old CVE, right? And that happens all the time. Because we're all focused on the latest and greatest, but we forget about what the CVE 1, which still exists. It's there. So AV is dying, and it's dying a slow death. We need a new way of approaching that, and there are folks doing that, and doing it in a fairly good way, I believe, in my opinion. And we've gone from defacing to destruction. It's no longer site defacement taking over, with some exception, especially around the political hacktivism. But now we're talking about changing records in the financial community, to put your thumb on the scale for euro to dollar transfer rates. It's talking about modifying health records to intentionally harm an individual or a hospital. We're talking about taking over HVAC systems. We're talking about water filtration systems. We're talking about the things that can hurt people or kill people. This is reality. This is reality caused less by the financial impact, which we all hear about. We hear about this all the time about taking your credit cards. By the way, the credit card value has been dropping precipitously over the years. Your credentials are the coin of the realm right now in the darknet. So the financial impact is interesting, it's important, but those who want to cause harm by leveraging the internet itself can cause death and destruction. Remember the Challenger and remember Chernobyl. Well, the nuclear sites, of course, are air-gapped. I don't know, I'm not involved anymore. But what I hear is that there's a pause, and they say, yes, we're air-gapped. But they still use, of course, TCP/IP throughout. So somebody who can jump the fence or interject, who knows? It's scary to me. As a practitioner, as someone who's been involved in that space, it's a little scary to me. On the side with, aviation, not necessarily the Challenger, I'm very scared. We hear these stories about people taking over in air. That's nonsense, by the way. They basically did a maintenance mode that's on the ground. They can't do it in the air yet. Tesla had their first incident with their autonomous driving software. It's going to have problems. Unfortunately, someone did die. Now, that person probably should have been paying more attention, from what I understand, without clearly not knowing the details. But the fact of having cars being taken over, has been demonstrated time and time and time again. A targeted attack on a vehicle is going to happen. Unfortunately, is going to happen. And that scares me as a practitioner, because what can we do that's better so that it can't happen, or it's extraordinarily rare for the type of an attack. 2010 was a pivotal year. A lot of things happened on the malware and the attack scene. Project Aurora, if you had not heard of it, that was a very widespread, very likely nation-state attack. But it doesn't matter who did it, it happened. Code was expunged, was removed from a lot of companies. But the reason I bring up Aurora in particular is because 5 years prior, that exact same attack happened to me and a couple of other companies. But we didn't share. We could have prevented it had there been a mechanism to make some of these changes. It didn't happen, so Aurora came back 5 years later, far more effective. We also had a couple of, we had Stuxnet, right? Well, Stuxnet forever changed the game. We also had Shamoon, if you remember that. Shamoon, I'm sorry, if you remember that as well. Both of those in around 2010. The reason why they were so impactful, because now they're showing that I can do destruction on equipment over the internet. Okay, the genie's out of the bottle now. It's not going back. No, Shamoon was kind of cool because it just destroyed 30,000 PCs, which was interesting. I mean, there's a rumor that Dell did it, but that's just a rumor. But it forever changed the face of these attackers, because some are politically motivated, some are financially motivated, and some are just motivated. But the fact is they can actually cause harm, shut down refineries, shut down hospitals. Things are changing. On the network side, everybody can take a deep breath. There's not a lot going on there. Why? And I think we all know the answer. We're fairly resilient, right? But DDoS still does work. And the reason why it works is because it works. Remember the first time I had a 140 gig attack, I'm going, oh, wow, I don't have a 141 gig pipe, so I'm in trouble, right? And I talked to my peers, I said, how do you guys defend against DDoS attacks? Add more pipes. Well, things are changing. We have other mitigation strategies. We have the cloud. Many organizations, especially Fortune 100 companies, are pushing, as you well know, they're pushing their term points into the cloud, and like an Akamai with Kona and all that good stuff. It works. It's not the ideal, but it works. So 50 Gs are still fairly prevalent. There's a 620 claimed. We know of a 510 that was successful. We believe it's a 620 that was claimed. But the point, though, is a lot of times the DDoS attacks are actually a ruse. And the reason why I brought this point up was because it actually, again, happened to me, where everyone is scrambling, everybody left to focus on the DDoS attack when we realized we were actually already being just snarfed like crazy. So it does still occur. The efficacy from the attacker's perspective is not there. If I'm an attacker, I want your content. Who cares if I'm going to take your site down? I don't care about that. What I want are either creds. I want your intel. I want your IP. So DDoSing doesn't really get you there. So for over 30 years, here are some of my observations. Number one, from a cybersecurity perspective, is that hygiene is still appalling. This is nothing that you can necessarily address from an IETF perspective, with an asterisk. I believe there are some, we'll talk about some suggestions that I have. But the need for companies to do a better job is acute. And there are reasons why we don't. For example, if you ask a CIO how many applications she has in her portfolio, well over 1,000, some 20, 22 years old. And, you know, it's just not easy to refresh that. So there are a lot of, they're mitigating a rationale for some of the hygiene problem. But the hygiene problem is the biggest one because, again, as an attacker, that's how I get in. Poor designs, poor procedures, and horrific coding. Again, that's how I get in. Automation is something we talk a lot about on the operations side and do very, very little about it. But one of the reasons why we don't do a lot of more automation is because it's hard. It's extremely hard. And we're doing automation on systems that weren't designed to be automated. So you see lots and lots of Python writers, lots and lots of Python scripts, trying to do things that are adding very inadequate band-aids to a very fundamental problem. And of course, the 800-pound gorilla is complexity. And the complexity dialogue is one that we know we have to address, but I don't hear answers of how to address it. If you look at a typical organization, Fortune 500, 35 to 70,000 compute elements, physical, haven't gotten to virtual yet, probably on the order of several thousand routers and switches, right, and firewalls, several thousand, many, many thousand. And then, oh, by the way, that 1,000 plus legacy applications that the CIO is struggling with. Ask anyone what's going on. That's a problem from a cybersecurity perspective that's acute. What we call our management plane from the cyberspace are all the tools, our IDS, IPS firewalls, our SIEMs, everything that we use from a security perspective is dying under its own weight. The average Fortune 500 company has somewhere in the order of 40 different products. Count them, 40 different products. And so what I asked my last two teams to do was tell me where you're spending your time. Not that I'm micromanaging, I just want to know. And we came up with 42% of the time in my last org was managing the management plane. That's care and feeding, patches, updates, tuning. It's insane, totally insane. But yet, that's what so many organizations are doing. It's a roller coaster ride that we got to get off of. So one of the things I did was I took an arbitrary number. I said, okay, I'll tell you what. We're going to go from, actually it was 42, from 42 products to 10. And my lead architect said, why 10, Kevin? I said, well, because I can count to 10 easily. And I can manage that. I can manage those companies. So that's where I often cite Phil Zimmerman. You know, PGP is pretty good privacy. It's not perfect privacy. So I had a lot of overlapping products in the portfolio and all that. We collapsed it down, and sure enough, it really helped us. I got time back in our pockets to actually do the hard work that we should be doing. But this is not sustainable. And oh, by the way, I argue that even those 10 that I came down to didn't make me tremendously safer, secure, I should say. We have a problem. And we have to be able to manage through this without being so tied to our own solutions. We lack insights into the network. And as a consumer, as a practitioner, we lack insights into the network. And of course, we all know the talent problems. Everyone has that. That's universal. But it's made more acute when I'm spending 42% of my time managing my management system. Oh yeah, complexity. So we're in a world where the consumers want ease, which is why I'm back to my username password for buying lots of stuff online, and they don't want to change it. They won't use OTPs or anything. That's okay. We'll work around it. The designers, the administrators, and the attackers. I hope you see a theme coming on here. And we're stuck with, okay, I tell you what, I'm gonna help you. The certificate for this site, by the way, this is made up, it's not real Juniper, but it's made up, is not trusted. Okay. This is not going to go away from the user community. It's not. Let's understand that. We have to understand that someone decided to throw this up as a warning to the user that, hey, you may not want to do this. And the user's going, whatever, I got to get over there. This is what we are dealing with. And we're dealing with it at a very, very large scale. We need to change the paradigm. We really fundamentally have to change the paradigm. And this is the beginning of my ask of IETF. So we've been working in a world for almost 40 years now of assumed trust, right? If you can shake my hand in the proper way, in a not so secret way, we're good. Come on in. Well, we have to start to change that. I think DNSSEC is on the right direction. Why the adoption isn't higher, I have no idea. I just really don't understand that one. I scratch my head like all the time on this one. It's like, well, wait a minute, they have a really good solution. Why aren't we using it? Go ahead, please.
Convenience.
Oh, I'm sorry, you read the slide. Exactly. And that's exactly the challenge we have. We have to get past that. We collectively, that's me on the user community and you on the design community, we have to do a better job because this is not sustainable. I do not want to be responsible for some targeted attack on a autonomous driving vehicle. I don't want to be there. I don't want to have the responsibility on my shoulders. Convenience. So let's talk about convenience, since we're here. Who is the one that's inconvenienced? The designer, the implementer, or the consumer? Consumer being, in this case, I'm sorry?
Consumer.
No, wrong answer. All of us should be inconvenienced equally. That we're the ones who have to deal with it, right? We're the ones who have to implement it, and oh, by the way, add more stuff to circumvent the weaknesses. Back to my 42 different security services. That is not sustainable. We have to inconvenience everyone a little bit. We're all in this together, all three organizations, all three groups. So I think one of the things is to consider in any new design reputation. I am a tremendous believer in crowdsourcing. It works. It's hard to put your thumb on a scale in crowdsourcing. People may be wrong in a crowd, right? We see this all the time in elections, right? People can be wrong in a crowd. But that's okay. Because now you have a much better indication of the explicit trust. Not 100%, but now you have a weight to add to your decision. One of the things we don't do, as we all know, is that we don't associate affirmatively, with the exception of SecDNS as an example. DNSSEC, that's why I like it. That's a great model to use. Yes, it's hard. Yes, certificates and PKI is hard, and it's clearly it's not a panacea. When I was at Symantec, we were in the PKI business, and we all know if you've been to a signing ceremony with your hood and everything, right? It's kind of cool. It's difficult. It's difficult to manage. It's difficult to manage when individuals leave your company who are part of the signing. Right? This is hard. This is very hard. But we have to stand up and take that challenge. I think that, again, DNSSEC isn't a good example of a framework, but as we come up with new protocols, especially for key, important protocols, not for everything, we have to consider affirmatively associating. This is the one that troubles me the most on the implementer side. I have 3 implementations of SNMP. One that meets the letter and the spirit of the RFC, one that meets the letter, one meets the spirit. Guess which 2 I'm going to attack? And guess which 2 I probably will get in? We have to reduce that ambiguity. Now, I say this from a different perspective. I came from an ANSI world. I was on 2 ANSI committees. And as we all know, you can make your entire career, used to, in ANSI. because of the longevity and the long the long tail of ratification and implementation. But at the end, there was very little room for ambiguity. There was some, of course, because why? Humans are still involved. But we need to address this problem because as a practitioner, I see variations all over the place. And some of those variations are well-known weaknesses. Some are not. Some are extraordinarily subtle, but the bad guys can figure it out because they've got time and money on their side. And oh, by the way, they have conferences like this. They share knowledge. They sell knowledge too. Assume ill intent. That's what's happening. This is not new news. I'm sorry, this is not news breaking. This is what's happening. If we design with the assumption of ill intent, we won't be perfect, but as Phil Zimmerman said, we'll be pretty good. This is a change in paradigm. As a practitioner, I'm asking this consideration. Automation is going to help us collectively in profound ways. I had a rule for for a couple of my teams is that if you did any activity more than twice a week, it was subject to automation. Doesn't mean you have to automate it, but consider it. And again, it was remarkable when folks spent the time, the inconvenience, to write either the scripts or the tool to help them automate. It paid itself back time after time after time. Federation is something that we don't talk about a lot. When I mean federation, I'm not talking about identity necessarily, but just federation in the sense that my domain, especially if I'm a large organization, I have the wherewithal to manage. We kind of know what we're doing, right? Let us do that. And so that we can do that from everything from authentication, authorization, lookups. Our caching could be a controlled and vetted caching, for example. Let's assume that federation capability is there. It's not there for everybody, it won't be, but for large organizations, it certainly can be. And virtualization, of course, we all know this is nothing new, but assume that's going to be the default. If I'm building anything today, it's starting with virtualization. Now, there we go. And the network itself has to be part of the solution. It does. So for all the network practitioners, we have to be part of the solution and not an innocent bystander. It's almost like this smart highway. We have to be part of that solution. So if we don't do this right, when that intelligent vehicle is a targeted attack and someone dies, we will see far more legislation which gives us less flexibility to do the things that we believe are right. I'm not saying this as an observer. I've been very active on the Hill. I've been brought in many times to talk to both Congress and Senate in the US, and the EU in Brussels, about pending legislation and the impact. Well, look, this is real. There are some terrible legislations that are already in place. To date, with the exception of one, they have not been prescriptive. That's the next generation. They're going to tell us how to do our work by laws, and of course, that's something we don't want. But if now I'm going to pause there for a quick second because in the U.S. there was an executive order in 2012. The president said, "Thou shalt share intelligence with the private sector." Didn't happen. 3 years later, a law came out, CISA in the U.S. basically said the same thing. But who to share with was always the problem. Because if you're a vertical, like a financial industries, and like, fine, you've been doing it for years. But if you're not, who do you share with, right? Yet, and so now there's a statute that says, no, you have to share, you have to consume it. And there's no vehicle to do it. So this is the artifact, a poor artifact of laws that we have to be careful with. And if we do our job right, we can help to circumvent some of this. This is definitely my soapbox, sorry about that, but it's been years and years and years on this. Thank you. I will take questions, by the way. Go ahead. Please.
Carrie Lynn, in an earlier century, something like the launch of Sputnik really changed, the education system in the United States, and a lot of us are sort of the product of that, at least those of us with gray hair. It seems to me that what you're sort of implying is we really need to do things a lot differently. We need to change the way we educate computer science students. Who exactly is going to make that clarion call, and who's going to set, the agenda?
That is a very, very good question. I too, even though I don't have gray hair yet, if I had a beard it would be, I was a student of the 60s. And we do need that clarion call. I don't know. I'm very involved with STEM. My company is very involved with STEM. But maybe it's an example where an IETF can outreach. I don't know. I wish I had the answer to that, but that's the first step in a 12-step program is this, acknowledging we have a problem. And I intentionally try to scare people, and I don't use that, I usually don't with cybersecurity, but what I'm starting to see now, and starting to see things that people can die, I get nervous. And we collectively are part of that. So I suggest maybe the outreach from IETF. I'm an interloper. I just happen to drop in and hopefully share some words with you. But we have to do something. STEM is a very in thing right now. It may be the right vehicle. I will tell you, coming from academia, the teaching of computer science is woefully it's just ridiculous. It still is. People are focusing on pen testing and breaking things, not designing things to be resilient from a security attack. And we have to change that as well. But I hear you loud and clear. Again, IETF, and if I can help, I'm more than happy to help with that. Sir.
Hi, I'm Daniel Kahn-Gilmore from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. So thanks for coming today, and I totally agree with you that we have there's a set of massive problems around secured infrastructure and trust. And I had a question for you specifically in your role as a Juniper security officer about the recent ScreenOS vulnerabilities. You guys had used dual EC in the ScreenOS devices, and with a custom queue, so that when the dual EC vulnerability was announced and made quite clear, I believe your response was, it's okay, we use our own queue. So my question for you was, well, I guess it's sort of a two-part thing, but why did you choose to use dual ECDRBG when it was slower than the other RNGs in the first place? And two, how did you generate your own queue? What mechanism did you use for that?
So I'm going to answer this the following way. We have formally responded in our FAQ, which we're still is still our vehicle, our response, definitive response. You can debate rewinding the RNG discussion at that time. I wasn't with Juniper, but I was implementing ECC, and we were debating amongst ourselves how to do it right. Nobody knew the proper way then, when this was originally done. So I'm going to leave it with that and kindly ask that you review the FAQ. I believe it may have been refreshed. I'm not so sure, but...
Okay, but from your point about trust and that we need to sort of assume that devices are malicious that we are interacting with over the network, I'm wondering, I mean, surely you understand that that Juniper suffered like trust in Juniper devices must have gone down as a result of seeing the series of vulnerabilities that were announced. Right. And I'm wondering if you have any proposals for how we can restore trust in the Juniper networks. Like, have you guys considered, for example, opening your source control so that people can see what actually happened, or any other?
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I really, and I'm not saying this to kind of shortcut the answer, but I do appreciate the question. It's a valid question, but I believe we've answered, with the exception of the source control access, which we do for certain parties under NDA and licensing. I think we've answered that. Because remember, this was also ScreenOS product, which yes, people are still using. It was a completely different model than we do for Junos. Completely different. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
So my name is Jim Galvin, and something just occurred to me in listening to the last question, because he asked you about, how did you, the presumption was that trust in Juniper would have gone down as a result of the incident, and so what are you doing to bring it back up? And actually I want to challenge the assertion that that's what happened, because I think what would you say, I mean, I get out of a lot of what you said, and something that I've always felt about security and security incidents is the fundamental problem is the fact that people really don't seem to care. I mean, not enough people or not the right people care. So did trust in Juniper go down? Maybe there was a tiny little blip for a moment among people who are practitioners, but in reality, as a practical matter, who noticed and who really cared and why would it matter? And wouldn't you say that that's part of the problem that we're dealing with here in the large? It seems that's part of the message that you're trying to convey here.
I hear you. It's not so much, and that's more of a complacency. I think is kind of what you're addressing. And I'd say no. I think the practitioners, we had, without a doubt, our biggest response was you were quick to respond, you were open and transparent as much as you can be on this problem, and you corrected it, right? So if there was a blip, I think it was restored. In fact, to a customer, that has been their response, and that's just because they're being nice. They were just honest, because it does happen. This is not unique to Juniper. We all know this. But the complacency issue, I think, is less about lack of interest than that's the way of the world. How many updates do we get across our portfolio each week? It used to be a lot. Patch Tuesday was, okay, I'm going on vacation Monday night, right? There's no way I'm going to be around on Patch Tuesday. It's gotten better, but we also have a lot more in our inventory. So we're always constantly patching. That goes back to my management plane discussion. So we expect that now, and I'm saying let's not expect that. Let's change the entire paradigm to reduce the noise, is what I'm suggesting. Does that make sense? All right.
Tobias Gonn, Huawei. I'm looking at this from what is your expectation towards the IETF question in terms of improving security? And one of the things that I noticed, I mean, IETF, we kind of wake up and then we try to do things, but our standards process is also not the shortest, maybe not as bad as ANSI, but we take some time. And then at the same time, there's this open source community, which kind of moves a little bit faster. And I wonder, what is your view, what would be your advice? I mean, is it do you feel open source is actually solving your problems and maybe standardization is actually not fast enough for what you need? Is there something you would like to advise us on how we can work better? Some ideas from your side would be.
No, Tobias, correct. I appreciate the question. Two quick answers. One is my expectation, my ask, not expectation, but my ask of IETF. And by the way, it's not just IETF. I have the same conversations with the open source communities too, is think differently to abuse Apple, right? Think different. When you design assuming harm as a starting principle can go a long way. We will find out, I guess the earlier question with regard to what do we do with training the next generation, is if they come out of school thinking this way, can you imagine the next generation of protocols? Completely different, right? That's my ask of IETF, to think a little differently, right? And I was somewhat prescriptive of what I'm asking for as a practitioner. But at the end of the day, we have what we have. What we have is what we have for now. If you think about 30 years is a long time. Think about a car in 1986 and a car in 2016. Think about the internet in 1986 and 2016. The big difference is just scale, frankly. But cars are radically different. They're smarter, they're quicker, they're safer. We have to think different. And oh, by the way, when you talk to the car folks, they came in at kicking and screaming. They did not, because why? What they were building was fine. They sold, they made money. But when people start dying, things started to change. So my ask of IETF is to think different. Any new protocol, especially one that has ramifications for broad ramifications, consider some of the prescripts that I suggested. That's all. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
This is my bag, I'm sorry.